Kalam Podcast is made possible through listeners like you. If you enjoy listening to Kalam, please subscribe to the show in whatever podcast application you're listening to right now, and please give us a rating. It helps other people find out about us. And if you'd like to support the show with a small donation, consider signing up to Kalam Podcast on Patreon for just $3 a month. In addition to supporting the show, you'll gain access to lots of great bonus content. Go to patreon.com and search for Kalam Podcast, or go straight to patreon.com/Kalam Podcast. That's patreon.com/Kalam Podcast. Now, on to the show. Hello and welcome to the 20th installment of Kalam Digest, our weekly news summary. Today is the 16th of January and I'm joined by my esteemed colleagues Sam Karl Samre and Nora Adin Faris, and we're delighted to announce that a ceasefire agreement has finally been reached between Israel and Hamas. Guys, what are your initial reactions?
Alhamdulillah, 8 months too late, at least. But of course, great news.
Careful optimism, I would say, but it would be great if this actually was the time when it ended. How about you, Edgar?
Yeah, I can't say much else. Sort of careful optimism, sadness mostly at everyone who's had to die, essentially, from this. But Nora, you've been in touch with a 22-year-old Gazan who's living in Al Mawasi refugee camp. Her name is Tala Herzallah. And I thought we'd start off the show by listening to her reaction to the news of a ceasefire.
I just can't believe it. I can't describe my feeling. Is it time to be happy, or is it time to cry over everything that just passed and we didn't have any chance to express our reaction on it? It's mixed feelings of happiness, sadness, pain, love, peace, relief, everything just all together. Alhamdulillah that we reached the end. Alhamdulillah that we are still alive and we've survived. Although everything bad happened, we are still breathing. Bright future that holds a lot of presents for us. Alhamdulillah, Nora, we did it.
So that was 22-year-old Tala Herzallah reacting. You can hear in her voice the relief, but also obviously the immense tragedy at what's happened at just like surviving this genocide. Nora, could you tell us a little bit about who she is?
Yes, so Tala is a young girl originally from Gaza City that I have been in touch with for a different project, where I have been following her a little bit and how her life has changed since the beginning of the war. And I spoke to her just briefly before New Year's Eve, just a couple of days before that. And she was telling me that last year at this time, she was sitting in a tent in Khan Yunis, displaced like many other people. And already then there were talks about a ceasefire and everybody was extremely hopeful. And this year she was sitting in a tent in Al Mawasi hoping for the same thing, but the optimism had left her and she didn't dare to be very positive, especially considering the things that she has seen and experienced now. And Tala is, she's living with her family in a very small tent. And her and her family have actually split up to make sure that if they get bombed, that someone from the family will still make it out alive. So her brother is living further up north in the Gaza Strip, and she is with her parents in Al Mawasi.
So as of the 16th of January 2025, more than a year into this war that turned into a genocide quite fast, I would say, More than 46,000 people have been killed, officially reported in Gaza, which in most certainty is a conservative estimate. Entire areas of Gaza have been reduced to rubble. Notably, Jabalia refugee camp is just, it looks like the moon or something. Sickness, malnutrition, and in some cases starvation have befallen the people of Gaza. This is a genocide which hopefully is coming to an end now. And at the news of this ceasefire agreement, obviously we've seen people celebrate in Gaza. We've seen similar scenes in Israel as families of relatives of hostages have expressed, similar kind of like relief that Ta'ala Herzala we just heard her speak about or express. But of course, this is only the beginning in what's going to be a very difficult ceasefire to implement. And we're going to get into the details of the agreement itself, its political implications, and whether or not Donald Trump should be given credit for it, which sounds insane to even consider. But it seems that the Netanyahu regime is already trying to sabotage it. We're recording at around 10:30, just after 10:30 a.m. Stockholm time on the 16th of January, like I said. Just an hour ago, or actually just like a half an hour ago, the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, his office said that it had cancelled the cabinet meeting in which the Israeli government was set to ratify the ceasefire agreement. Netanyahu's office has accused Hamas of reneging on parts of the agreement in an attempt to, quote, extort last-minute concessions. It did not elaborate on what that meant. This obviously does not bode well. Without knowing too much about this, Sam, what is your take on this kind of last-minute sabotage?
Well, as you just mentioned, Netanyahu's office is blaming Hamas for backtracking on the deal. Already, when I heard that, I would say it was 95% certain that that is a lie. There seemed to be no reason for Hamas to backtrack on this deal because it's basically the same deal that they've been accepting since May of last year. Why they would suddenly now, obviously being in a worse position than they were 8 months ago, backtrack on that deal, it seemed incredible. Now it's also come out from Hamas, saying explicitly that we are not backtracking anything. Everything that is written that's been leaked from this deal is we're still on board with that. And also other quote unquote independent or neutral sources speaking, it seems, from within the negotiations, saying that there's no sign that Hamas has backtracked on anything. So then what's going on? It's not the first time that Israel says this or that the US says this to put the blame on Hamas. I would say it's probably the same thing now. Israel is for some reason backtracking and they are not certain anymore that they want to sign this deal. Why would that be? Well, there's one very obvious reason. Already 2 days ago, Ben Gvir from the far-right Kahanist, fascist party, Otzma Yehudit, Jewish Power, said that he would stake everything in his political career to make this deal not happen, and he called on the other far-right leader in the government, Smotrich, leader of the Mafdal, the Jewish or the Religious National Party, to help him bring down the agreement. And since then, Smotrich has explicitly said that if the deal goes through, there will be a civil war in Israel. So let's just say there's good reasons for Netanyahu to feel insecure or not want to sign this deal. However, what will happen if he doesn't? We'll just have to see, because as we just mentioned, it seems Donald Trump has staked a lot on making this deal happen, and if Netanyahu would backtrack suddenly in the last minute, it will have immense consequences that's very difficult to foresee at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. We'll have to follow those developments closely. But in the meantime, how about we talk about the ceasefire agreement itself? It seems ironic that we started Kalam Digest, our weekly news summary, back in May. Remember, Sam, when we thought we were looking at a ceasefire agreement at the end, sort of mid-end of May of 2024. Now, 8 months later, and remember, week after week, we were like, "Is the deal coming now? Is the deal coming now?" And it kind of became this dark parody. But now, 8 months later, we're looking at pretty much the same deal, right?
Well, as far as we can see, I mean, it's not been officially published in its entirety yet, but as far as we can see on all the important parts, all the important aspects, it's exactly the same deal that Hamas has agreed to, and they've been repeatedly agreeing to since May, and which Netanyahu, at least according to the US, agreed to as well in May. But then he backtracked, and perhaps that's what's happening again. But so what this deal is, it's a three-stage agreement where the first stage is basically just a ceasefire, and Israel starts withdrawing from strategic areas inside Gaza towards the border with Israel. At the same time, a number of hostages are released from Hamas side, and a number of hostages slash prisoners from Israel, or Palestinian prisoners from Israel, are released on the other hand. So that's kind of the first stage. And then in the second stage, there's going to be more negotiations to make sure that there's kind of a peaceful transition, let's say, to a de-occupation of Gaza. And in the third stage, and more prisoners released and more hostages released. And in the last third stage, Israel will fully withdraw from all of Gaza, including the border crossing with Egypt, including the so-called Netzarim corridor, quote unquote, the strip of land in the middle of Gaza that they've used for dividing Gaza into two halves. And during that phase, the remains of dead hostages and dead Palestinians will be exchanged. So if that goes through, it's a huge success, let's say, for Hamas, and let's not say overall, but in terms of a deal, because Netanyahu has been consistently saying that he will never give up the border crossings with Egypt, and he will never give up the Netzarim corridor. And of course, the right-wing parts of the Israeli government, we just talked about, Smotrich and Ben Gvir, are explicitly saying that they want to reoccupy the entire Gaza Strip. So it would be a good, let's say, good deal. It's hard to say when, tens of thousands of people are dead and many more injured. But it's a ceasefire deal that would be a step back for Israel compared to what they've been demanding, and a decent deal for the Palestinians.
Yeah.
So that's the bottom line. But of course, we don't know. I mean, Israel has been in Lebanon, for example. They've been they signed one deal, but then they kept bombing Lebanon, as we've seen, basically as much as they want to. So you might have the same situation here, where they accept a ceasefire agreement, but they keep breaking that agreement over and over.
Yeah.
But if it goes through, it's the same deal as in May, and it's basically a step back or retreat for the Israelis.
Yeah, Nora, you've been in touch with Tala Hezbollah, for example. What do you think that this deal is going to mean for the people of Gaza? Like, what kind of relief are they looking at now?
So I've been in touch with some other people as well, above Tala, but what everybody is expressing immediately after the ceasefire was announced by Qatari officials is that we can go back home. I don't know really what this means now, with the fact that the meeting in the Israeli war cabinet has been cancelled for the day, and whether this means that the ceasefire agreement will be completely removed from the table, or if it will take even longer time. But the ceasefire is supposed to take place on Sunday, according to Qatari officials. They announced that yesterday, and they have been facilitating the ceasefire talks. But until then, what is going to happen with the Gaza Strip, until there is a ceasefire in place and it is implemented? How many more places will get bombed? And voices have been raised about the fact that the war is still ongoing, and the general violence against Palestinians as well. So the ceasefire is between Hamas in Gaza and Israel. But yesterday we read about yet another attack on Jenin refugee camp, which killed at least 6 Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. So the general violence and the general hostilities aren't really included in this deal. So even if it takes place, what is going to happen with the Palestinians generally? We don't know.
Yeah, indeed. Guys, what do you think this means for the region? We've been witnessing these huge convulsions all across the Middle Eastern region, which is our field. Obviously, this is why we're doing the podcast. And since October 7th, we've seen, obviously, the genocide in Gaza. We've seen a war in Lebanon. We've seen the entire Assad regime and the entire Ba'athist party in Syria fall. What kind of regional implications? Obviously, this has just been announced, but like, what are your spontaneous thoughts? How does this affect the region of the Middle East?
I keep starting off saying this all the time. It's very difficult to foresee, of course, but if we look at the situation in the region, it will mean basically that if this goes through, the movement that comes out least hurt by this entire process or this entire genocide, war, regional conflagration will be Hamas, which is, which would be very ironic and very confusing, but still, Hezbollah, severely weakened also in internal Lebanese politics. Assad gone. Iran, if this stays the situation stays like this. Iran being, very, very strongly weakened, not internally, of course, but in terms of its ability to push their agenda towards Israel and the US for that reason. What's Hamas still, basically in control of Gaza. And it's also something, we need to mention is it's not just, Israel, the entire reason for this war, not just doing an exchange of prisoners and captives, hostages, after a month or something, was that they were going to destroy Hamas. Finally they would do that. And I remember just seeing videos, the first kind of leaked videos from people inside Jabalia like a week or two ago, and you can hear in the background, there's intense shooting going on. There's intense fighting going on inside Jabalia after like 15 months of utter destruction. And how they managed to still have some kind of fighting capability, it's insane. And still, also yesterday, soon as the ceasefire deal was announced, you could see like Hezbollah, no, Hamas fighters in full gear with the headbands and everything and guns, just flooding the streets. They're still on the ground, they're still there, and you don't have to support their agenda or anything to just accept that is an incredible achievement on their behalf. And if Israel finally accepts this deal, which seems probable, I would say, it means that Hamas stays in power, and stays in control and stays, they have been severely weakened and a lot of the leadership has been wiped out, of course, but on the ground they seem to be, basically as strong as ever. So that is going to also, I think, affect how people kind of judge the outcome of this war, judge Israel. And around the Middle East, if that is the case, Israel will be understood to have lost this war. Even though they managed to inflict enormous human casualties, they will be seen as not having achieved anything.
That's such an interesting point, Sam, because already yesterday, before Israeli officials had commented on the ceasefire agreement, one of the Hamas leaders, Khalil al-Hayya, made a statement where he basically said that Israel has failed in achieving their goals in the Gaza Strip, and that Hamas will not forgive, and they will definitely not forget. So, even though there was in the ceasefire agreement, the third phase would be, trying to discuss a way forwards for the Gaza Strip and how it's supposed to be governed. This group, like Hamas, still exists. They have been, exactly like you're saying, they have been severely weakened, but they are not really going anywhere. I have a hard time seeing what this means, except for even more hostilities on both sides.
One party that has been severely weakened politically, especially by this whole process or these 15 months, is of course the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and the Fatah, or at least the government loyalist Fatah. As we've talked about before, parts of Fatah are actually fighting the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, in Jenin, for example. So, it will have enormous repercussions, I would say, also for internal Palestinian politics. As we mentioned last week, Dimas Arsour, a friend of the pod, brought up the idea that there might be a third intifada and, a peace agreement or a ceasefire agreement, which would kind of take the pressure off Palestinians externally towards Israel for a while, might very well lead to severe, confrontations in the West Bank between people, authority figures who are seen as, and rightly so, I would say, as collaborators, collaborating with Israel to weaken the Palestinian opposition.
I'm terrified that this is gonna sort of just end up as the same pattern that we've seen in other wars between Israel and Gaza, where a ceasefire agreement is reached, Hamas declares victory, huge casualties on the Palestinian side, not so much on the Israeli side. There are a few talks, and then everything just goes back to normal, and the blockade is still in place, the siege is still in place, and we go through the same cycle again, which terrifyingly is a real possibility. I think.
Absolutely.
I
mean,
think
it's even
that I think
probable.
it's in Trump's best interest to just keep the status quo. I don't think he might be able to. We're going to get into this, and we might have to give him credit for reaching this deal. But I don't think that his political expertise extends to a vision for the Middle East that anyone on the Palestinian side would accept. But that does kind of bring me into to the next point in today's digest, which is obviously the $1,000,000 question. How the fuck is it that the Biden administration failed to secure this deal back in May and the subsequent months that came after? Like, why would the Democrats forfeit this immense victory to their political rival, Donald Trump? It just seems absolutely insane. It's the same deal, essentially, as in May. Hamas agreed to it. What the Democrats had to do, essentially, was to put pressure on Israel. And Democrats themselves are saying this. The New York
Yeah.
Times quoted a Democratic congressman, what's his name? Tom Malinowski, okay, of New Jersey.
Malinowski.
He said that this was Biden's deal, but as much as I hate to say it, he couldn't have done it without Trump. Not so much Trump's performative threats to Hamas, but his willingness to tell Bibi, that is Netanyahu, bluntly that the war had to end by January 20th. Trump's Middle Eastern envoy, Steve Witkoff, who we've trashed on the show previously, and I've trashed in my columns, for being a fundamentalist settler, he reportedly went to Israel on Shabbat. The Israelis said, no, you can't come, it's Shabbat. He said, I don't give a fuck. I mean, he's Jewish himself. He's a settler. And he just went and he just made a bunch of threats. He wasn't involved in the negotiations specifically. He just made it very clear to the Israelis that if a deal is not reached by January 20th before Trump is inaugurated, you're going to be dealing with a very different administration, which is so counterintuitive. You know what I mean? So basically my question to you guys is should we give Trump credit for this?
Yes.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, which is a terrifying prospect, but I guess it is what it is. I mean,
he claimed the credit already. He went out on his platform, Truth Social, and he was basically tweeting about how, this is what I've done and I haven't even taken office. So I don't know, maybe we don't have to give him all that much credit because he's so quick on taking it himself. But, it is, you're right, it is absolutely, it's such a huge question as to why this had to go on for such a long time when it is exactly the same deal. It was already presented and this could all have been over months and months ago.
Yeah. I mean, I'll quote a Washington Post article saying that a diplomat briefed on the ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas credited progress in the talks in part to the influence of Trump, saying it was, quote, the first time there has been real pressure on the Israeli side to accept a deal, end quote. I mean, this is it. Yeah. It just reads as complete. It makes me hysterical. What the fuck?
I mean, there's this. I think the most revealing article I've read so far is from the Times of Israel, where I think the headline reads: Arab officials, meaning people who were present at the unnamed people who were present at the negotiations, quote, Trump envoy swayed Netanyahu more in one meeting than Biden did all year.
Oh, God.
And this guy
he
wasn't even on the negotiation team. He was just there saying you fucking sign this deal or else,
In a way, I think that the Trump administration and the Netanyahu administration, they speak the same language in a way because they're both thugs, baltajiye,
That's a good, nice word. We start using that more. Baltajiye.
Yeah. They're fucking baltageya, the Bibi baltageya. They really are. And I think that they respond better to like threats. You know what I mean? And I think the Biden administration, like, they speak a very different language of like the Obama era of like, you know, think tanks and shit like that. I don't know. That's just a spontaneous thought.
I think there's two important things to take away from this. One is, I mean, I don't know if I'm literally correct, but I was speaking on this when we talked about the question of what would a Trump victory mean for Palestine back in September, I think. And I said, perhaps it will be a good thing for Palestine. I was kind of playing the devil's advocate at the time, because Trump, as opposed to Biden, will not be okay with being publicly humiliated for his own personal political kind of pride. He will not be okay with Netanyahu treating the U.S. this way. And he will not be okay with, like, just Israel going basically public saying we don't give a shit what the U.S. thinks. He will not. That will not stand. Not because he is pro-Palestinian, of course. I mean, he's even less pro-Palestinian than Biden, if that's possible. But because to him it's important to show who's in power, who's in charge, and he will not accept Israel, which is like tiny little brother. Not even that. It's like they're so tiny compared to the U.S. in every respect, apart from the fact that the U.S. for some reason let them do whatever they want. And Trump will not accept that for his own political reasons, not because he cares about peace, not because he cares about Palestinians, not anything like that. I think that's one important aspect of this. I think the other thing is we shouldn't forget there has clearly been threats. I mean, to some extent, in terms of like, if you don't end this war probably by January 20th, we will put some kind of boycott in place, or some kind of embargo on weapons or something like that, or at least go publicly threatening with it. But there's also been promises made. I mean, surely Netanyahu is getting something as well. Without knowing, I would guess that there would be something about the West Bank. Because Netanyahu, parts of the right-wing flank of his government wants to reoccupy Gaza. But Netanyahu never wanted that. He doesn't actually want it. He wants to keep the Netzarim corridor and the border with Egypt, ideally. But he's okay with giving that up. And as you said, Edgar, returning to some kind of status quo where Gaza is just slowly starved, and they don't have to care, really. And they will, of course, secure the border better than before. And then perhaps the U.S. will explicitly back, for example, a major settlement program in the West Bank. I mean, it's difficult to understand how it could get any worse than before. They've been doing whatever they want in the West Bank for a long time. But, for example, he could get Trump around to actually saying like the West Bank is Israeli or something like that, which would mean a huge victory for him, especially in terms of domestic politics.
Yeah, Trump saying the West Bank is simply Judea and Samaria would be a huge victory for the annexationists, which are basically in the American government. I mean, if this feels surprising about Gaza, this feels like a backtrack or something, then I think you're absolutely right, Sam. I mean, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, the Israeli ambassador to the U.S., the U.S. Middle Eastern envoy, and the U.S. Foreign Secretary are essentially all annexationists in the sense that they believe that the West Bank essentially belongs to Israel. So yeah, we're gonna have to follow this closely. I think, guys, we should probably wrap this up so we can get this out today. That has been Kalam Digest on the 16th of January 2025. We have a ceasefire deal, inshallah, unless the Bibi regime sabotages it. Thank you, Nora Faris and Sam Carl Samra, for joining me today.
Thank you, Edgar.
حملوا على فرس ركضا وأهمسوا يا أصدقائي لن تصبحوا مثلنا حبل مشنقة غامضة 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 من